There are forces of good and forces of evil at work in the world today. What are these forces? Who is responsible for the good? And who is responsible for the evil? Richard Schaff talks about current events which are rarely discussed by the mainstream media, events that affect us all. This program seeks to identify, to inform, and to equip the believer for what's ahead. Welcome to What in the World is Going On?
This is What in the World is Going On, and I'm your host, Richard Schaff. The program is sponsored by Lincoln Log Homes. We are pro-Christian, pro-American, pro-life, pro-Second Amendment, and here only by the grace of God. I'd like to remind you, good listeners, if you can't tune me in on the radio station, I am on YouTube. That's 24/7. Just dial up What in the World is Going On by Richard Schaff. Oftentimes it's this radio program, but it is there if you missed this. Much is going on out there. I'm coming to you on Saturday before the Sunday broadcast, and just heard late last night that on that plane crash out of the Ukraine, well, the Iranians are now admitting they did it accidentally. They seem to they are stating that Trump might have contributed a little bit to it, and of course the Dems and the anti-Trumpers claim it's all Trump's fault. Of course, it was a Russian-made missile purchased by the Iranians, fired by the Iranians in their war zone, but somehow Trump gets the blame for it. I'm not at all surprised about that. Are you? No. Want to take a look at just a few of the things that are going on around in the world. Pelosi folded. You saw that. Boy, what a mess she made out of that deal, and still they're going to pay for it, and she's looking pretty silly. McConnell stood firm. I thought he would. After all, he's got some principle. Don't always agree with him, but I think he's done a great job in recent years. Those judges he's gotten through the Senate, he's standing tall. But Pelosi, she's got it all screwed up. The Dem senators that are running for president, they can't be in Iowa and they can't be in the Senate at the same time, and now it looks like they might be. She didn't want to start it. It was, we had to get it done because Trump was so dangerous. We had to get this guy impeached, and then she sits on it. Of course, she's controlled much by her left wing, AOC in the squad, that pack and the liberals. By the way, did you see where AOC doesn't want to pay her dues to the Democrat Party? She has formed a PAC and is going to be contributing to about 30 candidates to run against the establishment Democrats as they run in the House. She wants her own type in there, and she's going to go for it. Determination. God help us if she ever gets any place with any power at all. Saw on Hannity where America's on the brink in this next election. That's right, it is on the brink, folks. If you take a look at that bunch of Democrats that's out there, can you find one that you'd like to have be your commander-in-chief? Yet in spite of this, the markets are high. Yep, record employment, lowest numbers in unemployment, stock market breaking the records. Deregulation's done a lot of it. Tax reform has done a lot of it. We can thank our president for that, in spite of all he's going through. I don't know how the man does it. Yeah, I do. He's got the big help, the almighty help. He's got praying Christians behind him, and he's got the Lord on his side. Report that just came out on Thursday, that would be January 9th. The Iranians are promising more military action against the U.S. forces, and that could definitely start World War III. What in the world are they thinking? After Trump decided not to respond militarily to the rockets that the Iranians fired at U.S. bases in Iraq, it appeared that a major war had been averted. People all over the world celebrated this unexpected turn of events, and global stock markets soared. But now the Iranians are changing their tune again. Instead of standing down, top Iranian leaders are warning that a, quote, harsher revenge is on the way, and there will be more attacks against U.S. forces. Well, personally, I think that Iran correctly perceives that Trump does not want a war. But if Trump gets pushed too far, he will hit the Iranians, and he will hit hard. And once the Iranian homeland starts getting plummeted by U.S. missiles, the Iranians are going to start firing some of the 200,000 odd missiles that they've got stockpiled for Israel. And needless to say, the Israelis will respond with even greater force. In other words, any escalation of this conflict at this point has the potential to spark World War III. On Thursday, this past Thursday, January 9th, the commander of the Revolutionary Guard Aerospace Force claimed that the missile attacks the other night were just, quote, the first stage of a major regional operation aimed at expelling U.S. forces from the Middle East. His quote. Iran's missile strikes on Iraqi bases housing U.S. troops were the first stage of a major regional operation aimed at expelling the U.S. forces from the Middle East. The commander of the Iran's Revolutionary Guard Aerospace Force oversees most of Iran's missile arsenal. Well, he's stopped short of threatening further concrete military action. He also said that Iran hadn't intended to kill anyone in those Wednesday attacks, but only to cause material damage. Well, we suspected that from the start. But do they actually believe that Trump will allow them to repeatedly attack our forces without responding? If any American had been killed during the missile strikes the other night, it's quite likely that Trump would have responded already. And when Trump acts, he likes to make a major statement. Iran is playing a very dangerous game, and if they miscalculate just a little bit, there's going to be disastrous consequences. Many had been hoping that cooler heads would prevail, but at least on the Iranian side, that doesn't appear to be happening. And Iranian proxies are already lobbing rockets at U.S. targets. For example, last Wednesday, a couple of small rockets were launched toward the Green Zone in Baghdad. Small rockets hit the area in and around the Green Zone in Iraq's capital late Wednesday. That was a day after Iran launched missiles at bases housing U.S. and other coalition forces in Iraq. This, according to military officials from the U.S. Now, as we know, there were no U.S. casualties or any other coalition forces in the area, and no damage to facilities in the Green Zone. That's where the American embassy and other Western diplomatic posts are housed. But there was a rocket attack on an air base in Iraq. That was the Balad Air Base. Another day, another rocket attack on a U.S. air base in Iraq. That was Al Samarra. They report that rockets hit one base about 40 miles north of Baghdad. U.S. troops are stationed there. It's been reported that the Iranians let the Iraqis know what they were going to do ahead of time, and that our forces and the Iraqi forces had been conditioned for it, some of them evacuated. Perhaps Trump is waiting until there are American casualties to respond. And he certainly is not eager to get the U.S. involved in a major war during an election year, but at some point, his patience is going to run out. Meanwhile, the Israeli IDF has just conducted a stunning attack on Iranian-backed militia targets on the border between Syria and Iraq. According to reports by domestic and Western media, the Israeli Air Force carried out an attack against the Iran-backed militia. Tribal sources in Iraq apparently told reporters that the Israeli shelling targeted trucks and individuals associated with Iranian-backed militias near the Iraq-Syria border. Artillery and shelling was also reported, though it's unclear who fired those shots. The weapons are believed to have been destined for Hezbollah. In the end, even if President Trump is absolutely determined to keep the U.S. out of a major conflict, we could well see a major war between Israel and Iran. The Iranians have restarted their nuclear program, and Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has pledged that Iran will never be allowed to finish it. Folks, the clock is ticking, and Israel's going to do whatever it takes to keep the psychopaths in Iran from being able to build their own nuclear weapons. And we do have Trump's comment. What did he say? He promised, as long as he's president, Iran will not have nuclear weapons. So one way or another, war could well be coming, and it'll change all of our lives in a major way. Many were hoping that World War III was at least delayed for a while after Trump showed such great restraint last Wednesday. Unfortunately, the Iranians are determined to press their luck, and we're all going to pay a great price for their complete and utter recklessness. And that, folks, you can take to the bank. Now, I got to make a disclosure on this next subject that I'm going to cover. Normally, I would, something this extreme, I would have more than one source on it. But because it's coming from Natural News and Mike Adams, who I have great respect for, I'm bringing it to you, telling you that it has not been thoroughly checked out. But I want to bring it to your attention because, boy, if it's true, it's a biggie. Let's back up a little bit, back up a few years. Did we have a sleeper cell president? Well, according to this report out of Natural News, Obama granted citizenship to 2,500 Iranians as part of securing the nuclear deal. Yep, he gave Iranians U.S. citizenship as part of that nuclear deal where he gave them billions of dollars. As tensions rampant up anew between U.S. and Iran, following President Trump's decision to take out Iran's terrorist mastermind, Soleimani, it's worth remembering all of the things Obama did to empower that regime at the expense of American security. Not only was the so-called nuclear deal a sham, this temporarily postpones Iran's atomic weapons, but Obama and his chief deputy on the deal, Secretary of State John Kerry, enriched the Iranians and likely put Americans at risk. One of the concerns following the targeting of Soleimani by critics and some allies of our president is that the Iranians will retaliate for a time and place of their choosing. Writing for Natural News, January 1, founder and editor Mike Adams claimed that Tehran will soon activate sleeper cells. Its proxies have already been placed in the U.S., and it was done quite some time ago. He said, and I'm quoting, Islamic terrorist networks have been in place for years. What most Americans don't yet realize is that President Barack Obama helped fund these terror networks through a complex international money laundering scheme that's delivered over $150 billion to Iran during the Obama administration. You remember it. You saw it. At least $1 billion went to fund Iran's nuclear weapons. This with full knowledge from Obama. Obama even helped Iran capture a U.S. drone and 2 Navy boats in order to give Iran U.S. military encryption technology. Well, as a result, radical Islamic terror cells have a pervasive presence in cities like New York, Boston, Seattle, San Francisco, Orlando, Tucson, and other cities. He's not alone in that concern. Just recently writing in The Federalist, Todd Bensman noted that it's more likely any Iran's revenge attacks won't come from overseas against American military bases and warship, but it'll come against American citizens right here at home. Iran Avengers, in the form of Quad forces, supported Hezbollah. These operatives of the clandestine Unit 10 are stationed in cities right now across America, and right now they're set to activate, pending distant command on target lists that have been painstakingly developed over time. Hezbollah operatives also are positioned throughout Latin America, where American officials and economic interests are as close by as Nicaragua. Shiite Muslims from Lebanon, whose Iranian proxy Hezbollah have a large presence, were recruited long ago and trained to live in U.S. cities as sleepers of that group's clandestine external security organization, which is also known as Unit 910, 910. But what about Obama's role in all of that? Well, flashback back to July 2nd of 18 to a report by Fox News. Obama, as part of securing the nuclear deal, granted citizenship to some 2,500 Iranians. U.S. citizenship, good listeners. At least that was a claim made by the chairman of Iran's Parliamentary Nuclear Committee and a member of the governing body's National Security and Foreign Affairs Committee. He said the Obama administration agreed to make the 2,500 Iranians U.S. citizens as a means of currying favor with senior Iranian officials linked to President Hassan Rouhani. He said the mutual agreement sparks a competition among Iranian officials over whose children would benefit from the scheme. That was reported on Fox News by Chris Irving. Sleeper cells were already in the country, according to Bensman and Adams. Did Obama put scores more inside the country on his own? Kind of looks like they did. But you didn't see that on the mainline media. Meanwhile, Nancy Pelosi has now created a new war powers resolution that could protect Iran and accuse President Trump of war crimes for the killing of that rogue Iranian general. That's right. Her letter begins with a declaration that President Donald Trump's airstrike last week targeted Soleimani, a leader of the terrorist Iranian Revolutionary Guards Group. He's been responsible for the murders of hundreds of Americans and for recent attacks on the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. Well, they said it was provocative and disproportionate, terms suggesting the attack was illegal under international law and could even constitute a war crime. That's right. That's good old Nancy. And what did she do? She put through the War Powers Act. Now, folks, that is a non-binding thing. It means it doesn't have to be done. And it's only passed the House. It's not going to pass the Senate. And if they did, I'm sure our president would veto it. But see the pressure, see how she's making Trump look bad to the world. See how she's undercutting him even to support these murderous Iranians. And she heads our House of Representatives. Well, she wrote a letter to her Democrat colleagues in the House last Sunday, a week ago, to reveal this new power resolution, the war power resolution, and then she put it through. The man that President Trump ordered the strike on is someone who was responsible for the death of hundreds of Americans in the Middle East. And he was also behind the recent attack on the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. He's killed thousands of his own people. Taking out Soleimani was not only an easy call to make, it was one that was long overdue. The reason why he was not taken out before was because he'd been protected for 8 years by the Obama administration. Well, now that Trump has taken decisive action, Pelosi's ordered Congress to pass this war powers resolution that will protect Iran from further attacks and to declare that President Trump is guilty of war crimes. When the real news sounds like you're reading a satire from the Babylon Bee, you know things are really bad. And right now they're going crazy bad here in our country. Recently, when asked which Democrats were going to be the first to collect the $80 million for the killing of President Trump being offered by faction in Iran, a few commentators looked at the task and just wondered what Democrat would be behind that. This is less than 24 hours later. What do we see Nancy do? She and the Democrat-controlled Congress passed a war power resolution to stop President Trump from protecting America. Ain't she wonderful, folks? Aren't you proud of her? Right now, America's biggest enemy and largest threat doesn't come from the Middle East. It comes from the Democratic Party, who's doing everything they can to destroy this nation as fast as they can. One of these days, sooner or later, they might just get it done. But boy, they're going to pay a price, aren't they? From Breitbart News, they said that Pelosi's letter begins with a declaration that President Donald Trump's airstrike last week targeting Soleimani was responsible for the murdering of hundreds of Americans and for recent attacks on the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad. They say it was provocative and disproportionate, terms suggesting the attack was illegal under international law and could constitute a war crime. But from our president, he noted, Iran will never have a nuclear weapon as long as I'm in the White House. God bless him. By the way, Harvard Law School professor and Democrat Alan Dershowitz argued in Monday's Wall Street Journal that the strike was not only lawful, but an easy call. A quote from Alan Dershowitz. The president has the constitutional authority to take military action, short of declaring war, that he and his advisors deem necessary to protect American citizens. This authority is extremely broad, especially when the actions must, by their nature, be kept secret from the intended target. Nevertheless, Pelosi's letter indicates that the House would put through, and they did, in declaring the president's action illegal under international law. And that is a fact. Well, Democrats can stop a lot of things from happening, but they can't stop Trump from defending America after Soleimani's strike. But they couldn't care less when Obama was killing thousands. This, a bit of background information. We noted before that the Democrats have truly become the anti-American party, and while this transformation did not begin with Donald Trump became president, it's been completed on his watch. The Pentagon announced that the president had ordered a military strike to take out their revolutionary leader, Soleimani. He was one of our country's biggest enemies, being responsible for thousands of deaths of U.S. and Iraqi forces over the year. The order to kill Soleimani came only after months of escalation and provocations from Iran. This all culminated with the death of an American contractor at a base near Kirkuk. There also, 4 American service personnel were wounded, and then the attack on our U.S. embassy in Baghdad. By any reasonable definition, President Trump had every right to act on the Iranian actions. Indeed, many would argue that he was obligated to do so because the first duty is to protect America and its citizens. Democrats, however, are so affected with hate for the president and our country, this country that he leads, that they couldn't contain themselves after hearing the news that Soleimani was no longer breathing. He was an enemy of the United States, and that's not a question. But Senator Murphy, a Democrat of Connecticut, thinks otherwise. The question is this, he says, as reports suggest, did America just assassinate, without any congressional authorization, the second most powerful person in Iran, knowingly setting up a potential massive regional war? A tweet from the good Chris Murphy. This senator, who just 2 days earlier had complained that the president was impotent with Iran, as reported in Breitbart News. Listen to this, good listeners. Murphy, who serves on the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, tweeted a week ago, quote, "The attack on our embassy in Baghdad is horrifying but predictable. Trump has rendered America impotent in the Middle East." Yeah, and now Trump does something, he takes the guy out, and he said he ought to be shot for it. No one fears us. No one listens to us, according to Murphy. America has been reduced to huddling in safe rooms, hoping the bad guys will go away. What a disgrace. A quote from Senator Murphy. Well, that tweet didn't age too well. And if there's any disgraceful behavior to be ashamed of, it's not the President of the United States. It's this guy, Senator Murphy, Democrat of Connecticut. But Murphy wasn't the only Democrat offering aid and comfort to the enemy. You know that Muslim Ilhan Omar, Democrat of Minnesota, the rep? Well, she's always in favor of whatever Muslim country's giving the U.S. trouble. She took up for Iran naturally. Dems couldn't have cared less when Obama was ordering strikes. But boy, it's sure a sin now, isn't it? In responding to Murphy's ridiculous tweet, she accused Trump of a wag the dog scenario and claimed she was going to stop him. So what if Trump wants war, knows this leads to war, and needs the distraction? What distraction? Well, the real question is, will those with congressional authority step in and stop him, she said. I know I will. Boy, can you imagine? Americans elected her. And on the subject of Trump wanting a distraction at this time, what distraction could Trump personally need? Oh, the impeachment thing? That's the last thing our president's concerned about, because despite the disgraceful conduct of the House Democrats returning 2 bogus articles of impeachment against him, there is zero chance he's going to be removed from office by our Senate. But here's the thing. Where were these Democrats when President Obama was launching one drone strike after another throughout the Middle East, Iraq, and Syria? We know that Omar wasn't in office yet, but Murphy was. So was Elizabeth Warren, who complained about Trump's action as well. Joe Biden complained, and he was Obama's vice president. Bernie Sanders complained, but he's a closet commie anyway, and nothing America does to defend itself is ever acceptable to him. Well, the Washington Times reported in April of 2015 that by then Obama had ordered the launch of more than 2,800 strikes against targets in Syria and Iraq, all as part of a conflict Congress had yet to specifically authorize, and amid worry lawmakers wouldn't ever do. The paper noted Obama just justified the attacks under his command in chief powers and under the 2001 resolution authorizing force against al-Qaeda and the 2002 resolution authorizing the ouster of Saddam Hussein in Iraq. So what's different now? Well, there is a big difference. Trump is in the White House now, so bring on the Democrat hypocrisy. It's bad enough Democrats are accusing Trump of abusing power over this strike. It's worse in that they couldn't have cared less a few years ago. What a difference an administration can make. And if you think Trump gave a great speech the other day, you're really correct in that. President Donald Trump stepped up to the podium, backed by his advisors and the Joint Chiefs. He spoke directly to the American people for the first time since he ordered the targeted strike on Iraqi soil against Soleimani. Iran's terrorism mastermind is gone. During the speech, which took less than 10 minutes, Trump spoke in slow, measured terms that demonstrated both leadership and fatigue. Shortly after Trump concluded his speech, Scott Adams, who specially, aside from writing one of the world's most popular cartoon strips, is Persuasion. He put out a tweet stating that Trump's speech was, quote, one of the best presidential speeches ever. Adams is correct about the power behind Trump's statement to the American people, to Iran, and to the world. In straightforward, lucid terms, Trump hit all the appropriate notes. His first sentence was one of incredible power. He said, and I quote again, as long as I'm president of the United States, Iran will never be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. From that opening, Trump set out several important facts and principles. First, the Iranian ballistic missile strike did not kill or injure any Americans. Second, Iran has been a destabilizing force in the world since 1979. Third, Soleimani was directly responsible for terrorist attacks against civilians and American troops inside and out of the Middle East, as well as being responsible for the death of their own country people. Fourth, ever since 2013, when Obama foolishly freed up $150 billion in assets and $1.8 billion in cash, Iran has been on a terror spree in Yemen, Syria, Lebanon, Afghanistan, and Iraq. American taxpayers funded this terrorism, including Monday night's missile attack. Fifth, there's been no peace in the Middle East as long as Iran is not reined in. NATO, Russia, and China need to join us to make that happen. Sixth, Iran can proceed as it has, or it can abandon its evil wills and become a thriving nation, one that partners with the West to everyone's benefit. Trump closed his speech with a reminder that the American military is the most powerful and effective in the world. Trump noted explicitly that the military can partner with Iran to continue to wipe out ISIS and implied that the military can also be used to destroy Iran. In sum, Trump said to Iran, play nicely with us and you'll prosper in ways you never imagined. Continue as you have been, and our powerful American military is going to destroy you. Trump's delivery and words were that of a statement. This is not a madman with a military at his disposal. Instead, Trump is a man who desires peace, but will make war if necessary to defend this nation. For those watching, he presented a strong contrast to Democrats who are so lost in Trump hatred that they've accepted Iran's interests and narratives as their guiding principles. And folks, that's where we are today. It's time for us to get rid of those Democrats in the House. It's time to replace them with some America-loving patriots. Once again, we've got Trump in the White House, and we need to keep him there. And we will keep him there with the help of God. Our obligation? To vote? Yes. To tell our friends and neighbors? To plead our cause? Yes. Beyond that, to fervently keep the Lord in our prayers and mention Donald's name, our president, Mike Pence, our vice president, not only for their physical safety, but for wisdom and direction. And thankfully, keep those evangelical leaders on board that are supporting him in his hour of need. God bless until next week.